What I'm going to talk about now is another technique we use quite extensively to understand losses from an incident. When the asset is impacted, it results in consequences. And consequences in our interpretation can be loss of confidentiality, loss of integrity, or loss of availability. But the way we actually describe these losses follow a very specific structure. The FAIR framework is a risk assessment or risk analysis methodology that builds up around these quantitative risk assessments. And it presents to you some templates or some models that you can apply your risk scenarios into and use to deconstruct your risk scenarios into meaningful components. So if I ask you, how much are you going to lose from a cyber attack? That's a very wide question to answer. And what we can do instead is we can piece it, unbuild it, you could almost say, like a Lego set. If you take it apart piece by piece, you can look at each of the pieces and you can much better estimate sort of what is the level of consequence for each of these pieces. So in terms of decomposition, this is one of the cornerstones of risk management, we believe. This exercise of breaking down your challenges or your uncertainties into smaller uncertainties or smaller challenges that can more easily be measured or be estimated. How many kilograms of coffee beans are consumed in Denmark each day? And remember back to Frederik's presentation, you want to give an estimate where you are 90% certain. So you might say, okay, I want to break this down. Then you've broken this down and you've implicitly made a calculation or made a formula in your head that says number of Danes times the percentage of Danes who are coffee drinkers times the number of cups times the amount of grams in each cup should give me a rough estimate. So you could take the lower estimate, 42,480 kilograms. If you do the same with the upper bounds you just estimated, you get something like 265,500. And if you look at the report, it would say that it's something like 140 tons, which is 140,000 kilograms of beans consumed daily in Denmark. Of course, this number, and it's the same with the Norwegian coastline example from earlier, these are also approximations. So we are just basically doing a similar exercise here to get smaller pieces that are easier for us to understand and to work with in terms of understanding the potential losses from these incidents. Now, how we do this with the open FAIR framework. How the FAIR standard builds it up is you have a threat, and this is back to the scenario idea from both earlier. You have a threat which breach or impair a particular asset. This breach causes some consequences, which is this observable loss event. The observable loss event will have some direct consequences. So these are costs and losses directly associated with the incident. And it will have or might have some secondary losses, which is losses occurred based on people outside the actual incident reacting to you having had that incident. We have a risk. A risk is composed of a loss event frequency, so the likelihood of an event occurring. This is what Frederik has been talking to you about. And there are some further decompositions of the loss event frequency if you want to go down into more detail or break that down even further. But you can also just remain on this upper level and just talk about sort of what is the probability of this event occurring within, let's say, the coming year. Then the other branch, which is the one I will talk to you about now, is the loss magnitude branch. This measures the size of the impact to your organization if an incident occurs. And it's measured in primary loss, which is direct consequences from the incident, and secondary risk. So we have a secondary loss frequency and a secondary loss magnitude. If you have a major cyber attack, one of the examples of secondary loss could be lawsuits following the release of client data. And that might not be something that would happen every time. Let's say you are in that horrible situations that you've had enough cyber attacks to actually have experienced it multiple times. It might only be 50% or 10% of the incidents where you actually had a secondary loss afterwards. When we talk about loss magnitude, I want to sort of take an example and break it down and refer back to Fredrik's discussions where he presented this 90% confidence interval. We are going to be working with the same idea in all of our estimations here. So we allow for real world events that falls outside of our own confidence level. Again, accommodating some of these biases and the tendencies we humans have to not work entirely rationally with probability. So doing this, let's say we have the first part of the decomposition, we have this risk scenario. So if we want to just make this an example, this could be someone who's been lurking in your system for about half a year, looking around what to exploit. They've extracted a lot of your customer data, and now they've decided to deploy ransomware, so they block your system and you cannot access any of your files. The main things we see in primary loss would be handling cost, it will be loss of productivity for your organization, and any kind of replacement of equipment. So if we talk about handling cost, this formula, you decide to calculate this formula for a minimum level with the 90% confidence and a maximum level. Now you might have some productivity as well. This could be direct lost earnings. If you have a business that is a web shop, you survive by being available for clients all the time. If you are maybe a consultancy business or a bank or similar, you might have your productivity, your lost earnings is actually measured by how many employees do I have sitting on their hands at this point, not able to do anything. Turns out this productivity loss actually can become very large, especially if you have a large workforce who is dependent on IT systems working. The last thing I want to put into this box of primary loss in this time around is replacement cost. So this would be if you have any kind of hardware or similar that breaks during this incident, and you need to replace a switch in your office or similar. Okay, secondary losses. This is where it becomes a bit more fluffy, but our clear argument throughout this is every kind of loss can be quantified. This also includes secondary losses, being, for example, competitive advantage, being reputational losses, being any response cost related to these consequences in your secondary losses, being maybe fines and judgments following an incident like a data breach or similar. These might not be the areas you find easiest to quantify in the beginning, but think about what you do today in terms of understanding the risk of these events. Most likely you already today in your head make some kind of mental model about how does our risk to reputation compare against our risk to operational budget. You make this model in your mind today already. We just want to put it down on paper. And this is not going to be a perfect model. Back to Bo's comment, it's going to be all models are wrong, but we want to make models that make us less wrong over time. I just want to sum up this brief walk into decomposition of scenarios. I hope it makes sense to you at least that deconstructing a loss event into smaller pieces allows you to much better estimate each of these pieces, and it also is the first step towards being able to actually mitigate based on your estimated losses from particular events. The FAIR framework is only one approach. You can use your own approach, homemade as well. Why we recommend you start off with the FAIR model is because you come into a community where you have the same language as many other risk experts across the world. So when you talk about subject matter experts or secondary risk or primary risk, you start to have a language that is actually comparable across organizations. There are a lot of different ways and different finer details to decompose risk, and it's also, in our view, a way or a question of starting off a place. the first year, you're not maybe going to have the most perfect quantitative risk assessment, but you're going to have some kind of estimate of where you want to end up. And this estimate is going to be extremely useful for next year when you then have sort of fine-tuned your model. You might say, well, it doesn't make sense for us to look at this because this really doesn't matter for our losses. It's a non-issue, you could say. But we have very large estimated losses or very wide ranges on another area like secondary loss reputation. Then maybe the goal for next year is to be better at estimating reputational loss. So we dive in, we might do a market analysis. How much is our customers actually worth to us? How many would actually shift and so on. And that way we can start within the same framework to qualify our, and that's not a pun, unfortunately, or excuse me for that, but you want to qualify your your estimates in each of these areas to become more precise while maintaining accuracy.